Good morning. This is online class lecture note from Dr. S.K. Paul, Professor and Head, University Department of English, BRA, Bihar University, Muzaffarpur. Dear students of PG Semester 3, CC10, Unit 01, Modern and Contemporary Poetry, Yeats. Today I am going to deliver my lecture on the topic A Critical Appreciation of Leda and the Swan by William Butler Yeats. Leda and Swan is basically a sonnet. This is a very significant sonnet. Yeats's Leda and the Swan is a sonnet based on Greek mythology and one in which he interprets the rape of Queen Leda by god Zeus as an incident of annunciation of a 2000 years long phase of civilization cycle in history. Yeats first dramatically presents the moment of the mythical rape of a Greek queen Leda by god Zeus in the form of a wild swan. Then he goes on to contemplate its significance and consequence. For Yeats, this was the announcement or making point of the whole era of destruction of a civilization, especially in the Trojan War. This poem also illustrates Yeats's philosophy that history moves in cycles of 2000 years. Each cycle is begun by the intervention or interfering of the divine force and conception of a divine being and ominous being alternately every 2000 years. The poem is also a unique sonnet. The sonnet Leda and the Swan is a metaphorical treatment of the moment of annunciation prompted by Yeats's feeling that some steadying point for a new cycle was imminent in his own period. He sees Grecian civilization beginning with the myth of her eggs came love and war. The symbol of Leda is enriched by the previous poems which focus upon Helen and the ruin of Troy. The problem posed in this poem is whether opposites ever coincide. This is a symbolic poem. Leda and the Swan is a symbolic poem about history, but it also plays word games like in suggesting the intercourse in broken wall. So this is an erotic poem. This is some sort of sexual elements is very much in this poem because the theme of this poem is the rape of Leda by the swan. Actually, he was Zeus. This is a symbolic poem about history, but it also plays and games like in suggesting the intercourse in broken wall. Another feature in its unique form of a sonnet, the poem is based on an episode of ancient Greek mythology. Zeus, changing himself into a huge swan, raped the princess Leda, and out of the union was born Helen, whose elopement with Paris subsequently led to the Trojan War. In the form of sonnet, this poem pictures Zeus's rape of Leda and in conclusion, poses a question. Zeus by his rape of Leda begot not only Helen but also the whole consequences of Helen, the fall of Troy. The Troy was destroyed. They have lost Troy. The fall of Troy and the death of the Greek heroes. So it was a great setback. Yeats was employed Freudian imagery in the poem. The white rush, the broken wall. Why rush the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, etc. In the octave, Yeats has built up the imagery of the event in its sheer physicality. The sestet gives us its moral equivalent. The physical concreteness of the octave is symbolic. The sestet tells us what it is symbolic of. The poem ends with the interesting question whether Leda, having been impregnated by the god with his power to create the future, had my awareness of how the future was now working through her. But this poem brings us not to a set attitude but it to a problem. Is man merely the creature of impersonal forces, himself only a passive vehicle of an indifferent divinity, or does he have a portion of divine intelligence within himself? Yeats's theme is the birth of the Homeric civilization, which is where his imaginative understanding of history begins, but the sonnet does not borrow its power from the significance of the theme. The octave describes the god Zeus' forced impregnation of Leda and her ineffectual human efforts at resisting this sudden implosion in her loosening thighs. So, sudden implosion in her loosening thighs. The sestet's first sentence reveals the consequent engendering of the Greek age of Homer. The second sentence of the sestet poses a question not so equivalent to the Greeks, who, thinking often of women as booty, rather accepted the inexorable blind run of fate and the inevitability of tragic human destiny. But this poem brings us not to set attitude but to problem. Is man merely the creature of impersonal forces, himself only passive vehicle of an indifferent divinity, or does he have a portion of divine intelligence within himself? The poem's final question, however, is highly relevant to Yeats's ultimate meaning. Did she put on his knowledge with his power? Could Leda fathom Zeus's knowledge before being dropped? The real answer is beyond the merely logical categories of yes and no. Since the real poem transcends the categories of the myths it utilizes to lead the reader to an inward vision. The poem can be seen as a criticism of beauty too. Helen is criticized for lack of wisdom. She left her legitimate husband and eloped with Paris, which was so much devastating that it created havoc all around. Similarly, beautiful Clytemnestra killed her own husband. It is an act which could never be forgiven. Both women and beauty, but no knowledge at all. Yeats criticizes a beauty where there is a lack of wisdom. Beauty without knowledge can be devastating, and the above poem serves the same example. This sonnet, Leda and the Swan, is a powerful description of the union between the human and divine. This poem is a perfect blend of mythological story and Yeats's imaginations about the history. The poem is beautiful in its descriptive narrative of sexual union also. Yeats compacts this poem's terseness by using synecdoche. Only the vines, waves and bill are attacking, only Leda's fingers, nape and things are resisting, only a wall, roof and tower represent the Greek siege of Troy, though it was a war waged for 10 years to recover 10 years to recover Helen. The richness of the symbols, especially as they function organically within Yeats's overall poetic context, is astounding. The central dedication of all Yeats's work was always to the mystical, as the Swan god's impregnation Leda initiated the Greek age. So did the dove god's impregnation of Mary initiate the Christian age. Since mythic ages last about 2000 years, this age must be on the cusp of a new revelation, an idea Yeats explores in the Second Coming. In contrast to Leda, the Virgin Mary must have understood much since she was given a choice. The Christian Annunciation is like a proposal, and Mary had free will in accepting the role of being the mother of God, because Christianity cherished informed free will as the Greeks cherished fated human destiny, unlike the brute blood of the air. The brute blood of the air, the dove, the Christian age is wholly a physical and otherworldly. Leda and Swan, published in 1924, is one of W.B. Yeats's most widely anthologized poems. The poem, which somewhat unusually for Yeats is a sonnet, is about the rape of the Greek girl Leda by the good Zeus, who was assumed the form of a swan. Here is Leda and the Swan and some notes towards the analysis of this intriguing and enigmatic Yeats's poem. Just I am going to the text, Leda and the Swan. I am going to read out the lines. Leda and the Swan. A sudden blow, the great wings beating still above the staggering girl, her thighs caressed by the dark waves, her nape caught in his bill, he holds her helpless breast upon his breast. How can those terrified vague fingers push the feathered glory from her loosening thighs? And how can body laid in that white rush but feel the strange heart beating where it lies? A shudder in the loins engenders there the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon mate of made for life. So although this overture is unlocked for, there is a suggestion of its permanence too. The shudder in the loins, Zeus' orgasm, brings about the broken wall, the burning roof and tower, and Agamemnon dead, all references to the Trojan War. But what does the final question in Yeats' poem mean? Does it suggest the Leda should have learned from her experience with Zeus, and that what follows, the Trojan War, begun because of a woman she brought into the world? A woman brought into the world is partly her fault. Or is this too uncharitable a view of Yeats' perceived uncharitableness? It remains a baffling question with no clear answer. Perhaps the knowledge is simply knowledge of what is to come, regardless of what Leda does, as well as giving birth to Helen of Troy. Leda will also conceive Clytemnestra, the wife of Agamemnon. Clytemnestra will later kill her husband after the Trojan War for sacrificing their daughter in exchange for fair winds from the gods. When Zeus overcame Leda with his divine power during the moment of his assault, did he also impart foreknowledge of what this event would cause before? Once it was all over, he dropped her, having done that she came to do. Leda and the Swan, it remains an ambiguous poem, partly because of the wealth of unanswered and perhaps unanswerable questions. Yet sets up in his 14 lines. This analysis hasn't endeavored to provide neat and glib and false answers to these questions, but we have sought to highlight the subtle way in which Yeats describes the brute violence of the act, while also hinting at its momentous importance for history, or at any rate one version of history. Thank you. Discussing this poem is over, and I will discuss more next day. Okay, thank you.